The notification didn't even make a sound. It just vibrated against the cold granite of the kitchen island. A short, dull buzz that shouldn't have meant anything. It was 9:04 p.m. on a Friday. Outside, the Seattle rain was doing that thing it always does, misting against the windows, blurring the city lights into streaks of gray and gold. Inside, the house was perfectly still. I picked up the phone, the screen lighting up my face in the dim room. Girls' night. Don't wait up. Short, cold, almost flippant. I stood there in the kitchen doorway, holding the device like it was a grenade with the pin pulled out. I stared at that sentence until the words started to blur. Girls' night. It sounds innocent enough, right? Just a wife going out to blow off some steam, maybe grab a few cocktails at a bar in Capitol Hill, laugh about how much work sucks. But words have weight, don't they? And in a marriage, especially a marriage like ours, which had been slowly bleeding out for the better part of 2 years, words have context. Vanessa and I weren't in the honeymoon phase anymore. We hadn't been for a long time. But even stale marriages have rhythms. Even broken clocks tick eventually. And this text? This broke our rhythm entirely. We had a routine. If she was going out, there was a preamble, a discussion about dinner, a mention of who was going. Hey, Sarah and I are thinking of grabbing sushi. This was different. This was a dismissal. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could have called her. I could have asked who she was with. I could have started a fight right then and there. But something in my gut, that primal instinct that wakes up when you're standing on the edge of a cliff, told me to play it cool, to wait. I typed out a reply, my fingers feeling stiff. Hope you and the girls have fun. I hit send. I watched the little delivered receipt pop up, and then I waited. I didn't expect a reply. Honestly, I didn't expect anything other than silence for the next 4 or 5 hours. I figured she'd stumble in at 2 a.m., smelling like white wine and excuses, and we'd do the polite dance pretending everything was normal in the morning. But life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. I poured myself a bourbon, 2 fingers neat, and walked into the living room. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I just sat in the leather armchair by the gas fireplace, staring into the flickering orange glow. The heat felt good against the damp chill of the house. I took a sip, the liquid burning a slow path down my throat. 10 minutes. That's all it took. 10 minutes after I sent that text, headlights swept across the front window. Bright, white LEDs cutting through the darkness of the living room like a searchlight. I froze, the glass halfway in my mouth. It couldn't be her. She just said, don't wait up. She just said, girls' night. You don't drive all the way to a venue, send a text like that, and then turn around and come home in 10 minutes. Unless you never went to the venue in the first place. Unless the lie was so heavy you couldn't carry anymore. Or, and this was a thought that made my stomach turn, unless the plans fell through. I heard the garage door rumble open, the heavy mechanical groan vibrating through the floorboards, then the silence of the engine cutting out, then the distinct thud of the car door closing. She must have driven like her lie was chasing her. The front door opened with a quiet, careful click. It was the sound of someone trying not to be heard. The sound of a teenager sneaking in past curfew, or a wife hoping her husband had already gone up to bed. She stepped into the foyer. I heard the rustle of her coat, the keys hitting the console table. Daniel, she called out, lightly, too lightly. It sounded rehearsed, like a line in a play she didn't really want to be in. Are you up? I didn't answer immediately. I just took another sip of bourbon, letting the silence stretch out, letting it fill the room until it was thick enough to choke on. She walked into the living room, and I saw her silhouette frame against the hallway light. She spotted me in the chair. Oh, she said, a little breathy laugh escaping her lips. I didn't know you'd be sitting in the dark. You scared me. I turned my head slowly, the leather of the chair creaking beneath me. I met her eyes. I tried to keep my face blank, tried to channel the calm of a poker player holding a losing hand, but betting it all anyway. Didn't know I'd be home? I asked, my voice low, barely rising above the crackle of the fire. You left without a word. Vanessa. And now you're lying about it. She froze. Her smile faltered, just for a second, before she plastered it back on. It was a nervous flutter, a twitch of the lips. Lying? She laughed again, walking further into the room, reaching for the back of the sofa as if she needed something to steady her. Babe, what are you talking about? I told you I'm with the girls tonight. We were going to do a late dinner, but plans changed. Plans changed, I repeated. I raised my phone, the screen glowing in the darkroom, displaying her text from 12 minutes ago. Then why the panic? I asked. She blinked. Once. Twice, like a computer trying to process a command it didn't understand. I wasn't panicking, she said, her voice tightening. And I'm home, aren't I? Why are you interrogating me? You were home in 10 minutes. Vanessa, I said, standing up now. The motion was slow, deliberate. 10 minutes from the time you sent that text. That means you weren't in Seattle. You weren't even in Bellevue. Where were you? Mercer Island? With him. Her face fell. It wasn't a subtle shift. It was a collapse. The color drained out of her cheeks, leaving her looking pale and exposed in the firelight. She looked away, toward the hallway, toward the kitchen, toward anything in the world that wasn't my eyes. There's no one else, she whispered. Don't be dramatic, Daniel. Dramatic? I stepped closer, entering her personal space. I could smell it now. The perfume. It wasn't her usual scent. It wasn't the light floral stuff she wore to the office. This was heavy. Vanilla, musk, amber. It was the perfume she wore when we first started dating. The stuff she wore to high school dances. You're wearing lipstick you haven't touched in 2 months, I said flatly, pointing to the shade of crimson on her lips. Your hair is curled. You spent an hour on that. And that perfume, that's the one I told you reminded me of when we were 18. She flinched. But sure, I said, my voice dripping with ice. Girls' night. Vanessa exhaled through her nose, a sharp, frustrated sound. She dropped her purse onto the sofa and crossed her arms, shifting her weight. The fear was evaporating, replaced by annoyance. It's a defense mechanism I knew well. When caught, attack. You're acting like a detective in a movie, Dan, she snapped. Seriously, it's exhausting. Just say you're mad I went out without asking for permission. I'm not mad, I said. I'm awake. There's a difference. That got her attention. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the hesitation in her eyes. She was calculating. She was trying to figure out how much I knew, how much she could spin, and whether it was worth the effort. She wanted to argue. She wanted to come up with something clever, some airtight alibi about a friend having a crisis in a parking lot nearby. But nothing came, because we both knew the truth. It was hanging in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. I'm going to bed, she said abruptly, brushing past me toward the stairs. She moved quickly, like she could outrun the conversation. But as she passed, as the scent of that vanilla perfume washed over me one last time, I turned. You don't love me anymore, do you? I whispered. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't shouted. It was just a question. A quiet, devastating question. She stopped. One foot was on the first stair, her hand gripping the wooden banister a little too tightly. Her knuckles were white. She stood there for a long moment, her back to me. The house was silent. No cars outside. No rain. Just the sound of 2 lives fracturing in real time. She didn't turn around. She didn't deny it. She didn't scream that I was crazy. She just stood there, letting the silence say everything I was terrified to hear. And honestly, that was worse than any confession. If she had fought me, it would have meant she still cared enough to win. But this was apathy. This was the end. She walked up the stairs, leaving me alone in the dark with my half-finished bourbon and a cold fire. The sun didn't rise that morning. It clawed its way up the horizon, gray and reluctant, like even the day knew what was coming and didn't want to watch. Vanessa was still asleep when I got dressed. She always was these days. We didn't sleep in the peaceful, intimate way couples do when life is good. Tangled limbs, shared warmth. We slept like 2 strangers sharing a boarding house, politely pretending the other doesn't exist. She was turned away from me, her body curled into a fortress of blankets I hadn't been allowed near in months. I looked at her back, the rise and fall of her breathing, and felt a strange, hollow ache in my chest. Not heartbreak, exactly. It was more like the phantom pain of a limb that had been severed a long time ago. I didn't wake her. I didn't need another performance. I didn't need her fake sleepy smile or her vague excuses about last night. I went downstairs. The house was dead quiet. The only sound was the coffee maker sputtering to life, the gurgle of water turning into steam. I poured a cup black and walked to the sliding glass door. I stared out at the backyard. The grass was still dewy from last night's fog, glistening like crushed diamonds. Somewhere behind the line of cedar trees, downtown Seattle was waking up. I could almost hear it humming with ambition. And standing there, holding that hot ceramic mug, all I could think about was time, not in the poetic sense. Not time heals all wounds or cherish the moments. No, I was thinking about time in contracts. I was thinking about deadlines. I was thinking about the date on a calendar. Because that $10 million merger, the one I had been bleeding for, the one that represented 15 years of missed birthdays and late nights, was weeks away. My lawyer's voice echoed in my head, drilling into my skull with all the grace of a jackhammer. I had met with him last month, just for a consultation, back when I still had a shred of hope that I was just being paranoid. If you want to keep what's yours, Daniel, you get out before the ink dries, Eli had said, leaning across his mahogany desk. Washington is a community property state. Any assets acquired after you're married or while you're married are split, unless specifically protected. You've got one shot. If that merger closes while you're still legally bound to her, she owns half of your future. I took a slow sip of coffee and felt the burn travel all the way down to my stomach. It helped. Not much, but enough to sharpen my focus. I had built everything I had from the ground up. My name meant something in this city now. Contracts, real estate, development. My hands had literally signed the paperwork for the future skyline of South Lake Union. Vanessa had been there through the early struggle. Sure. She'd smiled at the networking parties. She'd worn the designer heels I bought her. She'd charmed the VP's wives. But lately, she'd become a stranger with perfect nails, hollow compliments, and a phone she guarded like a state secret. I didn't need a confession to know. A man knows. When the intimacy dies, when the eyes stop meeting yours, when the girls' nights become frequent and the explanations become vague, you know. And now, after last night, I had something more dangerous than suspicion. I had clarity. But clarity comes with a price tag. I turned away from the window and sat on the couch, the leather creaking beneath me. The morning sun was casting long, razor-thin slits of light across the living room floor. Girls' night. Don't wait up. That message played over and over my mind like a ticking bomb. Not because she said it, but because of how she said it. Like I didn't matter. Like I was just an appliance in her house, an obstacle to her fun. Well, she had no idea what it felt like to be methodically erased from your own marriage, but she was about to learn. I reached into the drawer under the coffee table and pulled out a yellow legal pad I hadn't touched in years. It was actually Vanessa's idea once, years ago. You should journal, Daniel. She had told me, handing me the pad. You keep too much inside. Write it down. I'd laughed at her then. I thought it was soft. But now it felt strategic. If this went where I thought it might, if we were heading toward a courtroom, a record would matter. Not for therapy. For the judge. I uncapped the black pen. I dated the top corner, 7:12 a.m., Friday, and I began writing. Vanessa returned home at 9:15 p.m., said she was at a girls' night, wore lipstick she hasn't used in weeks, strong perfume, didn't make eye contact, lied 3 times in under 2 minutes. The pen scratched across the paper. Cold, clean, factual. It didn't even feel personal anymore. And that scared me a little, honestly. Because the further I pulled away emotionally, the clearer I saw everything. The games, the silence, the manipulation. It had been happening for longer than I'd admitted to myself. But once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. I closed the notebook, finished my coffee, and grabbed my jacket. Vanessa was still upstairs, probably dreaming in that big master bed about someone who wasn't me. Fine. I had my own dreams now. And mine came with lawyers. I parked in a private garage near 5th and Marion. It was one of those subterranean concrete labyrinths where the air always smells like exhaust and old money, and the attendants wear tailored vests and know better than to ask questions. Downtown Seattle was alive above me. I could feel the vibration of it through the soles of my shoes as I walked to the elevator. It was a buzz of commerce, espresso cups clinking on saucers, briefcases swinging, people in raincoats darting across crosswalks with purpose. It used to inspire me. 10 years ago, looking at those glass towers made me feel like anything was possible. Now it just felt like camouflage. It was the perfect place to disappear into strategy. I took the elevator up. 10 floors. The office was a corner suite with glass walls that offered a sweeping, gray view of the sound. Ferries moved like toys across the water, slow and oblivious. I shook hands with the man who held the detonator to my marriage, Eli Marsh, 48 years old, Harvard Law, and the kind of guy who wore shirts that cost more than most people's rent. He didn't look like a shark. Sharks have dead eyes. Eli had eyes that were entirely too alive, sharp, assessing, calculating the value of everything in the room, including me. I didn't hire him for his credentials, though those were impeccable. I hired him for his temperament. He was lethal in court, but calm as a whisper in person. He motioned for me to sit as he pulled up my file on a tablet. There was no small talk. No, how's the weather? Or, how are the Seahawks doing? Eli dealt exclusively in facts. I'm assuming this is urgent, he said, his fingers steepling on the polished mahogany desk. It is, I replied, unbuttoning my jacket. We need a clean break before the deal closes. I can't have this dragging out. He nodded once, like a chess player understanding his opponent's opening move. We're still set to finalize the acquisition by the end of the month. That gives us 18 days. 18 days, I repeated. Then we've got time, but not luxury. I leaned back in the chair, running a hand through my hair. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, a knot that hadn't loosened in 48 hours. I looked Eli dead in the eye. I wanted ironclad, Eli. No loopholes. No lingering hooks. I don't care if she walks away with the furniture. I don't care if she takes the car. But she does not get the future. That merger? That's mine. He clicked his expensive pen and scribbled something on a yellow legal pad. Then we don't ask for a fight, he said smoothly. We hand her the terms. Non-negotiable pre-deal asset protection. Mutual release. No claim on post-acquisition earnings. You keep everything acquired after the signature date. Simple, clear, enforceable. I exhaled. It was the first time I'd felt air move freely in my lungs in days. Hearing it laid out like that, reduced to clauses and signatures, made it feel manageable. It wasn't a heartbreak anymore. It was a business transaction. She'll resist, I said. She likes to control the narrative. Eli didn't look up from his notes. Let her. That was why I hired him. The indifference. There was a moment of silence, the only sound the scratching of his pen. Then he glanced up, his gaze piercing. Does she know what's coming? I hesitated. No, not explicitly. But she knows something's off. She's smart, Eli. She plays soft, but she watches. She calculates. Then we outcalculate her, he said simply. He closed the folder. This isn't emotional anymore, Daniel. It's structural. That word stuck with me as I walked out of the office and back into the gray drizzle. Structural. He was right. Our marriage had become a collapsing building, rotten foundation, cracking walls, and I had to make sure I walked away with the blueprints before the whole thing came down on top of me. Back in my car, I sat with the documents Eli had printed. Preliminary drafts. Clean language. Neat paragraphs. It was amazing, really, how much pain could be reduced to Helvetica font. All she had to do was sign. But as I traced the signature line with my thumb, I knew she wouldn't. Not without a performance. Still, for the first time in weeks, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. And whether she realized it yet or not, Vanessa had already lost control. Vanessa made chicken piccata that night. She never cooks. In the last 3 years, the extent of her culinary contribution had been ordering Thai food and plating it nicely. But the moment I stepped inside the house, the aroma hit me. Lemon, capers, butter. It was rich, savory, and surgical. It was a trap dressed in warm lighting. She was in the kitchen, wearing a soft green dress I hadn't seen in over a year. It was a kind of dress you wear on a date. Fitted, elegant, showing just enough skin to remind me she was beautiful. Her hair was curled slightly, bouncing as she moved. Her makeup was subtle, casual elegance. Curated to say, I'm still your wife, remember? She was plating dinner when I walked in, smiling like we hadn't been drifting in icy silence for weeks. Like she hadn't come home last night smelling of vanilla and betrayal. Thought I'd surprise you, she said, her voice light as the steam rising from the skillet. You've been working so hard lately. I wanted to, I don't know, bring a little life back into our evenings. I watched her closely, every movement, every glance. She wasn't nervous. Not yet. This was still her show, or so she thought. She was resetting the stage, changing the lighting, hoping I'd forget the plot twist from the night before. I slipped off my coat, hung it neatly by the door, and walked to the table. You didn't have to go through the trouble, I said. My tone was deliberately even, neutral. She waved a hand, dismissing my comment with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. It's nothing, just dinner. She poured wine into both glasses, chilled white, her favorite. I didn't touch it. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The clinking of silverware against china sounded deafening in the quiet house. She filled the void with small talk, stories from her office, a funny thing her friend Jessica said at yoga, a TikTok video I just had to see. I listened. I chewed slowly. I nodded occasionally. I let her exhaust herself performing normalcy. Then, when her fork clinked against the plate, and she looked up with a hopeful sparkle in her eyes, waiting for approval, waiting for me to soften. I cleared my throat. I put my fork down. I've decided to move forward with the divorce, I said. Her face didn't register the words at first. She was mid-smile, expecting a compliment on the sauce. Then the smile froze. Her fork stopped midair. She blinked once, slowly. "I'm sorry," she said, letting out a confused little laugh. "What?" I kept my voice low, measured. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the table. "I've already met with my attorney," I said. "The papers are being finalized. You'll get them by Monday." She stared at me. The room shrank. The warm lighting suddenly felt sickly. Her smile fell off her face like wet paint sliding down a wall, revealing the panic underneath. You're joking," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the last syllable. I shook my head. No. The silence that followed was vacuum-sealed. It was heavy, thick with all the things I'd waited too long to say. Vanessa's lower lip trembled. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, then back to me, looking for an escape route. "Daniel," she said, breathless, "where is this coming from?" I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table. "Where is it coming from?" I repeated. "It's coming from every lie, Vanessa. Every time you came home late with excuses that didn't add up. Every glance at your phone, like you were guarding a nuclear code. You thought I wasn't watching because I was busy working. But I was watching." She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. "I don't need a confession," I continued. "This isn't a trial. It's a decision, and it's done." Her eyes filled instantly. Tears pooled on her lower lashes, whether they were real or defense mechanism. I didn't care anymore. "Wait, just wait," she stammered, standing up. "Don't do this. You're angry. That's what this is. You're angry because of one bad night." "One bad night," I said with a faint, incredulous laugh. "You mean the night you told me not to wait up while you were with him?" Her breath hitched. She looked down at the table, then quickly back up, her eyes wide. "There's no him," she shouted, the desperation leaking into her voice. "There never was." "Daniel, please. This is paranoia. You're letting your stress get to you." "No," I said calmly. "This is clarity." She stood up abruptly, her chair screeching across the hardwood floor. "Okay, fine," she yelled. "You want to throw away our marriage because you think something happened? Because you have some delusion? Then go ahead. But you're wrong, and you're going to regret this." Her voice rose like a storm, filling the kitchen, but mine stayed still. I was the eye of the hurricane. "I won't," I said. She stared at me, really stared. She was searching my face for any trace of the man who used to need her validation, the man who would fold the moment she raised her voice. But that man was gone. He had died somewhere between the text message and the lawyer's office. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Strange, right? You expect to feel rage or heartbreak when you finally drop the axe on your life. But me, I just felt steady, like gravity had finally started working again. "You're impossible," she spat. She turned and stormed out of the dining room. I heard her footsteps pounding up the stairs, followed by the slam of the bedroom door. A dramatic exit. A punctuation mark she hoped would make me chase her. But I didn't follow. I stayed at the table. The house was quiet again. I looked down at my plate. The chicken piccata was getting cold. I picked up my fork, cut a piece of the chicken she had cooked to manipulate me, and ate it. I chewed. I swallowed. I took a sip of the wine she had poured. It was good, because power, once you reclaim it, tastes better than anything you ever lost. The next morning, the house smelled like a diner. And not just any diner. The kind of place where they charge $20 for orange juice and the servers call you honey. I walked downstairs expecting the cold shoulder. I expected the silence of the previous night to have hardened into ice. I expected a locked bedroom door, or, at the very least, a sullen glare over a bowl of cold cereal. Instead, I walked into a full production. Vanessa was in the kitchen. She wasn't wearing the sweatpants she usually wore on Saturday mornings. She was wearing satin pajamas, the champagne-colored ones that clung to her frame in a way that felt entirely intentional. Her hair was tied back in a loose, artful ribbon, and the spread on the island, it was ridiculous. Pancakes stacked in perfect threes, dusted with powdered sugar, scrambled eggs that looked fluffy and golden, with cheese folded in just right, bacon curled crisp on the edges, Exactly how I liked it, but hadn't had in years because she usually complained about the smell of grease. She didn't say much at first. She just hummed softly, moving around the kitchen with a fluid, rhythmic energy. She was pouring coffee into my favorite mug before I even fully stepped into the room. I sat at the island, feeling like an audience member who had walked into the wrong theater. I took a sip of the coffee. It was good. Of course it was. She slid a plate in front of me with a smile that reached nowhere near her eyes. It was a smile made of muscle memory and panic. "There you go, babe," she said. Babe. I hadn't heard that word in months. It landed in the room with a dull thud, heavy and fake. I looked at the food. Then I looked at her. "You Googled how to cook this, didn't you?" I asked. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. She blinked, her smile faltering for a microsecond before she forced a laugh. "I mean, maybe. So what if I did?" I thought it might be nice. A fresh start to the weekend. I nodded slowly. "It is nice." She sat down across from me, resting her chin in her hand, leaning in. She was trying to look casual, trying to recreate an intimacy we had lost years ago. "So," she said, trailing a finger along the rim of her coffee cup, "about last night?" I didn't answer. I didn't engage in the debate. I didn't ask what about it. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my robe and pulled out a pen. Then I slid the small black journal from the edge of the table toward me. She glanced at it, confused, her brow furrowed. "You're journaling now?" she asked, a note of skepticism creeping into her voice. She tried to make it sound playful. "Since when?" "Something like that," I said. I opened the book to a fresh page. The spine cracked slightly. I dated the top of the page. Then I looked her dead in the eye and I began to write. But I didn't just write. I narrated. Vanessa prepared breakfast. I said aloud, my voice flat, clinical. The pen scratched loudly across the paper as I spoke. "Pancakes, eggs, bacon." Smiled repeatedly. Pet name reintroduced. Vanessa's smile twitched. She sat up straighter. "What were you doing?" I kept writing, ignoring her question. Obvious behavioral shift post-divorce announcement. No mention of prior deception regarding Friday night. Possible emotional play. Strategy. Maintain distance. The silence that followed was absolute. The humming stopped. The playful atmosphere evaporated. "What is this, Daniel?" she demanded, the warmth draining from her face. "I'm documenting patterns," I said, flipping the page casually. It helps keep things clear. Memory is a tricky thing. Vanessa, especially when one person is trying to rewrite it. She stood up, crossing her arms over her chest, covering the satin. "That's insane. You sound like some FBI agent surveilling his own wife. You're documenting me cooking you breakfast? You're twisting a kindness into evidence." I raised an eyebrow. "If the shoe fits." She stared at me, mouth open, realizing that her charm offensive hadn't just failed. It had been cataloged. She turned away sharply, walking toward the living room like she might escape the air in the kitchen. But she couldn't escape it. The truth has a way of expanding until it fills every corner of a house. Over the next few days, the campaign continued. If anything, she doubled down. It was fascinating to watch, in a morbid sort of way. It was like watching a politician running for re-election after a scandal. She'd greet me at the door when I came home from the office, something she hadn't done since 2019. She'd lean in for a kiss, lingering just a second too long. I didn't return it. I didn't pull away violently, but I didn't lean in. I stood there like a statue, letting her emotions wash over me without absorbing them. She'd run her fingers down my arm while I was reading on the couch, acting like she forgot how long it had been since real affection passed between us. She laughed more, loud, exaggerated bursts of laughter that echoed down the hall at things that weren't even funny. She'd put on movies I used to love, classics, sci-fi, things she used to roll her eyes at, and ask me if I wanted to join her. "Come on," she'd say, patting the cushion beside her. I made popcorn. I didn't join her. I sat in my armchair. I drank my water, and I wrote. Each page of that journal became a ledger. It wasn't a diary of my feelings. Dear diary, today I felt sad. No, it was a record of the game. Tuesday, attempted physical contact 3 times. Suggested weekend getaway. Did not address the legal papers sent to her email. Wednesday, bought a new dress. Asked if I liked it. Complained about how distant I am to her mother on the phone, within earshot of me. She didn't realize that I had already won. She thought she was fighting for my heart, but she was fighting for her lifestyle. and I was simply taking minutes at the meeting of our demise. She upped the stakes by Thursday. I came home late, exhausted from a day of staring at spreadsheets and dodging questions from Eli about whether I was staying strong. When I walked in, the house was dim. The overhead lights were off. The only illumination came from candles, dozens of them, scattered around the dining room. She had ordered dinner in from my favorite Italian place downtown, the expensive one, the one we usually save for anniversaries. I didn't sit at the table. I didn't take my coat off immediately. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water, and stood by the sink, leaning against the counter. Vanessa was there in the doorway, watching me in silence. Her jaw was tense. She could feel it slipping. All the effort, all the pancakes, all the smiles. It was hitting a wall of indifference. Then, without warning, she moved. She came up behind me. I heard the soft pad of her bare feet on the tile. Before I could turn, she wrapped her arms around my waist. She pressed her cheek against my back. I froze for a moment. I won't lie. The oldest instinct tried to surface. I felt it, the ghost of muscle memory. This was my wife. This was the woman I had built a life with. Her warmth, her scent. For a split second, my body wanted to lean back. My body wanted to believe the lie, because the lie is always softer than the truth. But it passed. I remembered the text. I remembered the timeline. I remembered the feeling of being erased. I pulled away, gently, not cruelly. I peeled her arms off my waist and stepped aside, putting 3 feet of distance between us. "You can stop," I said. Her voice cracked. She looked small in the flickering candlelight. "Stop what?" "The performance," I said. She stepped back, looking wounded. It was a good look. She had practiced it. "So what? I'm not allowed to try anymore? You've already decided I'm the villain, so I should just give up? Is that it?" "No," I said calmly, drying my hands on a towel. "You're allowed to do whatever you want. Vanessa, you can cook. You can light candles. You can wear the satin pajamas." I turned to face her fully. "Except convince me," I said. "You can't do that anymore." She stared at me, tears welling up. "I'm fighting for us, Daniel. Don't you see that?" "No," I shook my head. "You never want to convince me that you loved me. You wanted to win me back like a trophy you forgot you owned until someone tried to take it away. But I'm not on a shelf anymore." The words hung there. "I'm not on a shelf anymore." She stared at me for a long time, trying to find her footing. She was used to me being the steady one, the predictable one. But the ground had shifted, and she was the one falling. "You're cold," she whispered. "I'm clear," I replied. I walked past her, leaving the expensive Italian food steaming on the counter. Later that night, I sat alone in my home office. The door was closed. The lights were dimmed. The journal lay open on the desk beside me, the ink dry on another entry. I wasn't working. I was scrolling through old photos on my phone. I saw her smile in Italy 5 years ago, when the sun was hitting the Amalfi Coast just right. I saw her arm hooked through mine in Napa, laughing at a joke I don't remember telling. I scrolled back further to our first apartment, the one with the awful yellow walls and the heating that never worked. I looked at those 2 young people. They looked happy. And sitting there in the silence of my big, expensive house, I realized something important. I didn't feel regret. I expected to. I expected to look at those photos and feel a crushing sense of loss, a desire to run downstairs and fix it. But I didn't. I felt resolve. Because looking at those photos, I realized I was the only one of them who hadn't changed. I was still that guy who wanted a partner. She had become someone else. Someone who needed an audience. Love isn't supposed to be a negotiation. You shouldn't have to lawyer up to protect your heart. And survival? Survival isn't supposed to look like romance. I closed the phone. I picked up the pen. Thursday, 11:45 p.m. Attempted emotional manipulation via nostalgia. Failed. I closed the book. Tomorrow was Saturday. And I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that Vanessa wasn't done. She had tried the intimate approach. She had tried the seductive approach. Now, she would bring in the reinforcements. My parents were coming to town. And if I knew Vanessa, she was already writing the script for them. They arrived early Saturday afternoon. My parents, Douglas and Marlene Bennett, Oregon native retired teachers, the kind of people who still bring physical maps on road trips because they don't trust a satellite lady. They are good people. They possess old-school values, hearts full of hope, and infinite capacity for forgiveness. Usually, those are virtues. But in the hands of a manipulator like Vanessa, those virtues were vulnerabilities. They were easy targets. They pulled into driveway in their dusty Subaru, bringing a basket of pastries from a bakery in Portland, a jar of homemade Marionberry jam, and a desperate, unspoken hope that their son's marriage was just going through a rough patch. Vanessa greeted them like she was auditioning for a Hallmark movie. I watched from the top of the stairs as she threw the front door open before they could even ring the bell. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater and jeans that looked casual but cost more than my first car. Doug, Marlene, you look amazing, she beamed, her voice pitching up an octave into that sweet, welcoming register she reserved for clients and in-laws. She threw her arms around them like they were her own blood, pulling them into a hug that lingered just long enough to look profound. Come in, come in. I made fresh tea, and there's a cobbler in the oven. Peach, Doug's favorite. She remembered. Of course she remembered. She had probably set a reminder on her phone. Strategy. Peach cobbler. I walked down the stairs slowly, my hands in my pockets. I felt like an intruder in my own home. Hey, Mom. Dad, I said. My mother looked up, her eyes crinkling. She hugged me tight, smelling of rain and lavender laundry detergent. Oh, Daniel, you look tired, honey. Work, I lied. It was the easiest shorthand for my life is imploding. Vanessa peered at my elbow, slipping her arm through mine. She squeezed my bicep. He works too hard, she said, looking up at me with a gaze so adoring it almost made me nauseous. But we're going to fix that this weekend, aren't we? My mother smiled, so wide her cheeks quivered. She looked between us, seeing the physical contact, seeing the smile, and exhaling a breath she must have been holding since Oregon. Oh, sweetheart, look at you glowing, she said to Vanessa. Whatever you're doing, it agrees with you. Vanessa actually blushed. She cast her eyes down, performed a little shy giggle. Must be the sugar from the baking, she said. I didn't speak. I didn't pull my arm away immediately, not wanting to cause a scene in the foyer, but I went stiff. I just stepped aside and let the fantasy walk through the door. For the next 3 hours, she was flawless. We sat in the living room. Vanessa served tea in antique cups we had received as a wedding gift and never used, not once, in 7 years. She had dug them out of storage. She had folded napkins into swans. Actual swans. She sat on the ottoman, knees together, listening to my dad's stories about the home renovation he was doing. Stories she had heard 12 times. Stories she usually rolled her eyes at behind his back. But today she hung on every word. She laughed at the punchlines. She asked follow-up questions. That is so clever, Doug, she said, touching his arm. Daniel, you should really learn a thing or two from your father about carpentry. I sat in the wing-back chair, nursing a coffee, watching the charade. It was terrifyingly good. If I didn't know the truth, if I hadn't seen the text, hadn't visited the lawyer, hadn't documented the lies in my journal, I might have believed it. I might have thought, wow, she really cares. That's the danger of a person like Vanessa. She doesn't just lie with words. She lies with atmosphere. She weaponizes comfort. She even made dinner from scratch. Chicken marsala with wild mushrooms, garlic mashed potatoes whipped perfection, and roasted Brussels sprouts with a balsamic glaze. I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment while she was cooking. The kitchen was a disaster zone of flour and pans, but she was humming. You've never made this, I said quietly. She didn't look back from the stove. I found a recipe. It's not rocket science, Daniel. Why are you doing this? She turned then, holding a wooden spoon, her face flushed from the heat of the oven. Because they are your parents, and I want them to have a nice time. Is that a crime? It's a cover-up, I said. It's hospitality, she corrected sharply. Then she smiled that same tight, warning smile. Go set the table, please. Use the good linens. Dinner was a masterclass in revisionist history. We sat under the dim glow of the chandelier. The food was excellent, which almost made me angrier. I wished it was burnt. I wished it was inedible so the reality would match the flavor. Vanessa kept the conversation flowing. She complimented my mother's sweater. Is that alpaca? It's divine. She asked about their neighbors. And then, inevitably, she turned the spotlight on us. Do you remember that trip we all took to the coast 3 years ago? She asked, eyes sparkling over her wine glass. The rental house with the leaky roof? My dad chuckled. How could I forget? We had to use buckets in the hallway. It was so fun, though. Vanessa sighed, looking at me. Remember Daniel? We stayed up late playing cards and drinking that cheap red wine. I think that was one of my favorite weekends ever. Just pure, simple family time. I stopped chewing. I remember that trip. I remembered it vividly. I remembered Vanessa spending the entire weekend in the bedroom with the door closed, scrolling on her phone. I remembered her complaining that the house smelled like mildew. I remembered her refusing to play cards because she had a migraine, only to be seen posting selfies from the balcony 10 minutes later. But tonight, in her version of the story, she was a heroine of family unity. She was painting the past with pastel colors. All smiles, no edges. It was a good trip. My dad agreed, oblivious. I sat in silence, carving slow, deep lines through my mashed potatoes with my fork. I nodded where appropriate. I sipped my wine like it was an anesthetic, waiting for the numbness to kick in. It was when my father clapped me on the back, leaning over the table with a grin, that I felt it. You know, he said, his voice booming with satisfaction. I was a little worried when you guys stopped calling as much a few months ago. But seeing you two tonight, you look stronger than ever. Stronger than ever. I almost laughed. A bark of laughter bubbled up my throat, bitter and sharp. I had to swallow it down with a mouthful of Brussels sprouts. I looked at Vanessa. She wasn't looking at my dad. She was watching me. Her eyes were locked on mine across the centerpiece. She wasn't admiring me. She wasn't loving me. She was assessing me. She was daring me to ruin the moment. She was checking to see if her spell was holding. I didn't break it. Not yet. I just held her gaze, my face a mask of stone. After dessert, the peach cobbler, served piping hot with vanilla ice cream. My mother cornered me in the kitchen while I was loading the dishwasher. She took my hand. Her skin was papery and warm. "She's trying, Daniel," she whispered, leaning in close, so her voice wouldn't carry to the living room. I paused, holding a dirty plate. "Nom." "No, listen to me," she said, squeezing my hand. "I know you. I know when you got that wall up. But look at her. Look at what she did tonight. She cooked all day. She's been nothing but gracious." I looked out the window above the sink. The backyard lights flickered against the fading purple sky. "Honey," she added softly, her eyes pleading, "you can't throw everything away over a rough patch. Marriage is work. Sometimes one person has to carry the load for a while. Right now, she's carrying it." I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my chest. It was the pain of being misunderstood by the person who knew you best. She saw the effort. She didn't see the manipulation. I didn't answer. "I couldn't tell her she's not carrying the load, Mom. She's burying the evidence." "She loves you," my mother said, finality in her tone. I turned back to the dishwasher, sliding the plate into the rack with a little too much force. "No," I said quietly, mostly to myself. "She loves not losing." Later, after my parents had gone to bed in the guest room, the house finally settled into silence. The performance was over for the night. The audience had left the theater. I walked into the living room. Vanessa was there. She was fluffing the throw pillows on the couch, chopping the tops of them with her hand to make them look perfect. She was lighting a vanilla candle on the mantel. She didn't look up when I walked in. She kept moving, rearranging a stack of magazines on the coffee table. "You really laid it on thick tonight," I said. She turned then. The smile was still there, faintly glowing like the embers of the fire, but her eyes were hard. "They're your parents, Daniel," she said. I wanted it to be nice. Is that such a terrible thing? Since when you care about nice? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "You haven't asked about my parents in 6 months. Tonight you acted like you were their best friend." She placed the last pillow with a perfect corner fold. She straightened up and looked at me. "I care," she said, her voice dropping, "since I realized what I could lose." I walked to the mantel. I ran my fingers along the cold edge of a framed photo. Us at a vineyard, back when I thought smiles couldn't be fake. Back when I didn't know that happiness could be a filter you apply in post-production. "You're not trying to fix this, Vanessa," I said, looking at the photo instead of her. "You're trying to rewrite it. You think if you dazzle them enough, if you make them believe we're happy, I won't be able to pull the trigger. You're using them as human shields." She moved closer. I could smell the vanilla perfume again. It was suffocating. "You could at least meet me halfway," she said. "I'm doing everything I can here." I faced her. The distance between us was only a few feet, but it felt like miles of scorched earth. "No," I said. "I've walked this entire marriage toward you, Vanessa. I've bent. I've compromised. I've rationalized every late night, every cold shoulder, every lie. Halfway doesn't exist anymore. I'm done walking. She stared at me, her eyes glassy. She realized the dinner, the cobbler, the swans. It hadn't worked on me. It had only worked on the people who didn't matter. So what? She whispered. You're really going to tell them? While they're here, you're going to break their hearts over breakfast. Eventually, I said, why? She threw her hands up, frustration finally breaking through the act. Why ruin the weekend? Why not just let them be happy for 2 days? I looked her dead in the eye and gave her the only honest answer I had, the answer that had been brewing in my gut since she opened the door with that fake smile. Because they deserve to know who you really are, I said, and I'm tired of helping you hide her. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, staring at me. Then she turned away and walked down the hall toward the stairs. But the way her back stiffened, that rigid line of her spine, told me everything. The show was exhausting her. The mask was heavy. And she didn't even realize that I was the only one holding the curtain open, waiting for the right moment to let it fall. Tomorrow was Sunday, brunch, and I had a feeling the curtain was coming down sooner than she thought. Sunday brunch was her idea. I thought it would be nice. Vanessa chirped early that morning, slicing a grapefruit into perfect ruby red crescents. The knife clicked against the cutting board with a rhythm that felt a little too fast, a little too manic. Just the four of us. Something light. Maybe we could all reset. Reset. She said the word like our marriage was a frozen iPhone app that just needed to be swiped closed and reopened to work perfectly again. Like the last 2 years of neglect and the last 3 days of calculated warfare were just a glitch in the software. She wore a pale blue dress that morning. Soft fabric, flowing sleeves. It was the color of forgiveness. Her makeup was light but strategic, a natural glow that required 3 different creams to achieve, just a hint of mascara. Her eyes were tired, the skin beneath them shadowed, but she painted over that, too. My parents sat across from us at the small patio table. The Seattle gray had burned off, leaving behind a crisp, golden morning. We were surrounded by the manicured hedges I paid a landscaping crew to maintain, because neither of us cared enough to water them ourselves. My mother was sipping coffee, smiling at everything Vanessa said. My father was eating a croissant, crumbs dusting his shirt. The sunlight made everything look gentler than it actually was. That's the thing about sunlight. It illuminates the beauty, sure, but if you look closely, it also highlights the dust. Vanessa was pouring orange juice into crystal glasses when my father leaned in slightly. He set his croissant down. He looked at me, then at Vanessa, his brow furrowing just a fraction. So, he said, his voice dropping into that serious register he used when he wanted to talk about finances or car maintenance. How are things really going with you two? I froze. My hand tightened around my coffee mug. I could feel Vanessa's body go still beside me. Not tense, ready, like a sprinter in the blocks waiting for the gun. I opened my mouth to speak. I was ready to say it. Actually, Dad, they're not going. But she beat me to it. Oh, you know, Daniel, she said with a bright, airy laugh, cutting me off before I could get a single syllable out. She waved her hand dismissively. Always the overthinker. He gets into these moods sometimes. Don't you, babe? She turned to me, smiling. It was a terrifying smile. It dared me to contradict her. He thinks I'm cheating on him if I stay at Pilates 10 minutes too long, she continued, turning back to my parents, rolling her eyes playfully. He gets so worked up. It's sweet in a way. Shows he cares, right? My mother chuckled, taking the bait instantly. Oh, men and their imaginations. Your father used to get jealous if I spent too much time talking to the mailman. My father grinned, but his eyes didn't leave my face. He flicked his gaze to me, searching. He was looking for a tell. He knew me better than anyone. He knew I didn't have an imagination when it came to facts. I stayed still, silent. I let her talk. Vanessa pressed on, emboldened by my silence. Her tone became syrupy, thick with feigned empathy. He's just been a little distant lately, she said, reaching out to place her hand on mine. Her palm was clammy. She squeezed my fingers, pinning my hand to the table like she was shielding me. But really, she was restraining me. I think the stress from work is getting to him. You know how he is with deadlines. That big deal is closing soon, and he's just spun out. She looked at my parents, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. He even told me earlier this week that he wanted a divorce, she added with a soft, incredulous laugh. Like it was a punchline to a joke we shared in bed. Can you believe that? Over stress. The air at the table changed instantly. My mother blinked. She set her cup down, the china rattling against the saucer. "You said that, Daniel?" she asked, tilting her head. "You said you wanted a divorce?" I didn't flinch. I slowly pulled my hand out from under Vanessa's grip. I placed it on the table, flat. "I did," I said. My mother frowned, confusion clouding her face. "But why? You two seem so—" Before I could answer, Vanessa cut in again, fast, panic masquerading as reassurance. "Oh, come on, Marlene. He didn't mean it," she said, her voice sweet as frosting. "He just gets in these moods, especially when he's under pressure. I've learned to just ride the waves. I know he loves me. I know we're solid. He's just venting." She looked at me then. Her eyes were wide, pleading. "Play along," they screamed. "Don't ruin this. Don't humiliate me." My father's eyes narrowed. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. The humor was gone from his face. "Dan," he said quietly, "is that true? Are you just venting?" The patio went silent. A bird chirped somewhere in the hedges, oblivious of the tension that was sucking the oxygen out of the air. I looked at my father. Then I looked at my mother, who looked terrified. And finally, I looked at Vanessa. She was holding her breath. She thought she had me. She thought that by framing my feelings as moods and stress, she had delegitimized them. She thought I wouldn't dare contradict her in front of an audience. I took a slow breath. "No," I said. The word hung there. Simple. Heavy. "It's not stress," I continued, keeping my voice level. "It's not a mood, and it's certainly not my imagination." Vanessa's smile faltered. "Daniel." "It's a decision," I said, looking directly at my parents. "One I've made with absolute clarity, and I haven't changed my mind." My mother put a hand to her chest. "Daniel, what are you saying?" "Oh, honey," Vanessa interrupted, her voice shrill now. "Now you're making them worry. Stop it. You're ruining brunch." "I think they should worry," I said calmly. "They should worry that their son has been living in a house where trust is a currency he ran out of years ago. They should worry that his wife comes home at night smelling like lies, and then serves pancakes the next morning like nothing happened." Vanessa gasped. "Daniel." My mother looked between us, suddenly less sure of the script. The pastel colors were fading, revealing the cracks in the wall. Vanessa stood up abruptly. She laughed, but it was sharp this time, jagged. The edge was barely hidden. "Okay, this is getting theatrical," she said, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. "Doug, Marlene, I promise everything is fine. We're just going through a little rough patch, and he's being dramatic. We'll go to therapy. We'll fix it." "Enough," I said. I didn't shout it. I just said it with enough weight to stop her mid-sentence. I looked at my parents. I stripped the emotion out of my face. I gave them the facts. "We're getting a divorce," I said. "It's happening. This isn't a phase. This isn't a negotiation. I've already met with a lawyer. I've already started the paperwork. It will be filed before the end of the month." My mother's lips parted. Her eyes went soft with confusion and hurt. "Daniel." But my father said nothing. He just looked at me. He looked at the set of my jaw. He looked at the lack of hesitation in my eyes. And then, slowly, he gave a nod. It wasn't a nod of approval, necessarily. It was a nod of recognition. He saw the man sitting across from him. He saw the resolve. Vanessa sat down hard. She collapsed into her chair, as if her strings had been cut. Her face went pale, the natural glow vanishing instantly. Her control, that carefully curated, iron-grip control she had maintained for days, slipped like water through her fingers. "You," she whispered. "You told them." "You forced me to," I said. "You tried to use them as a shield. Vanessa, you thought if you put on a show, I wouldn't be able to drop the curtain. But the show is over." She looked at my parents. She looked for the allies she had cultivated over 3 hours of tea and peach cobbler. But my mother wasn't looking at her anymore. She was looking at her hands, twisting her napkin. And my father was looking at the table, his expression grim. For the first time since that Friday night, I saw something in Vanessa's eyes that wasn't confidence. It wasn't calculation. It wasn't even anger. I saw fear. Real, raw fear. She realized in that sun-drenched silence that she had miscalculated everything. She had thought I was weak. She had thought I was the same man she had manipulated for years. She hadn't realized that while she was busy rehearsing her lines, I had been rewriting the entire play. I think my father said, standing up slowly. We should go for a walk, Marlene. Give them some space. No, Doug, please. Vanessa pleaded, reaching out. Stay. Finish your coffee. We're going for a walk, my father repeated firmly. He took my mother's hand. He gave me one last look, a look that said handle this, and led her into the house. We were alone on the patio. The silence was deafening. The bees buzzed. The wind chimes tinkled softly. Vanessa stared at me. Her lip quivered. You humiliated me, she hissed. No, I said, picking up my coffee cup. It was cold, but I drank it anyway. I just turned on the lights. She stared at me with pure venom, the mask completely gone now. You're going to pay for this, Daniel, she whispered. You think you can just discard me? You think you can just walk away with your big merger and your new life and leave me with nothing? I'm not leaving you with nothing, I said, standing up. I'm leaving you with exactly what you brought to this table lately. Yourself. I walked back into the house, leaving her sitting alone amidst the ruins of her perfect brunch. The next morning, she made waffles from scratch, with fresh berries, homemade whipped cream, and a pitcher of warm maple syrup. She sat down like it was a peace offering, like the previous day hadn't happened. I didn't touch them. Vanessa watched me from across the kitchen island, her fingers tapping nervously against her mug. She looked tired. The fight was draining her, but she wasn't done. I was thinking, she began, her voice light but brittle, straining under the weight of the silence. Maybe we should host something this weekend. You know, just a small gathering. Bring a little joy back into the house. I looked at her. A gathering? Just a party, she added quickly. Friends. Family. Maybe a few of your colleagues. Something warm. Uplifting. To show everyone we're okay. I set my coffee down carefully. You think a party will fix this? I asked. She shrugged, trying to look casual. I think reminding people we're still us could help. It shifts the energy. That word hung between us like a ghost. Us. There hadn't been an us in months. Just two actors sharing a stage, reading from different scripts. I leaned forward slightly. You want to host a performance, I said. She blinked. That's exactly what it is. I interrupted. You want to control the narrative again. You lost an audience with my parents, so now you want a bigger audience. You want to get all our friends in a room so you can play the victim or the saint, whichever works best in the moment. She crossed her arms. You're twisting everything I say. No, I said. I'm finally hearing it clearly. She softened her tone then. She leaned across the island, her eyes wide and imploring. Daniel, people are starting to ask questions. Your parents are confused. The neighbors notice you stopped wearing your ring. People talk. If we don't control the story, they will. Good, I said. Let them talk. Her jaw tightened. What happened to you? You used to care about our reputation. I stopped playing along. The silence that followed was deep, honest. For a moment, I thought she'd explode, or cry, or beg. But instead, she smiled. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't warm. It was strategic. It was the smile of a general who just saw a flank opening up. If we do host this party, she said slowly, testing the waters, you could tell people yourself. Clear the air. Show them who's really walking away. If you're so sure about this clarity of yours, why not say in front of everyone? And there it was, the trap inside the offer. She wasn't throwing a party. She was baiting a stage. She knew I hated public scenes. She knew I was private. She was betting that if she got me in a room full of our friends, I would fold. I would play the happy husband just to avoid the awkwardness. She was banking on my politeness. She didn't know that my politeness had expired. I'll think about it, I said casually. She perked up. Really? But only if we agree on one thing. I said, what's that? There'll be a contract at the party. Her face twitched. Excuse me? A marriage contract, I said. Simple. Transparent terms. Both of us sign it. To protect the future. Yours, mine. Her eyes narrowed. You want me to sign something in front of people? If you love me, I said softly, throw her own words back at her, you'll sign it. If we're so solid. If this is just a rough patch, then putting our commitment on paper shouldn't be a problem, right? The words landed like a brick wrapped in silk. She didn't answer. She just stared at me, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. She turned back to the sink, washed a perfectly clean dish, and let the water run long after it was needed. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and stepped into my office. My lawyer picked up on the second ring. She wants a party, I said. Eli chuckled on the other end of the line. A dry, knowing sound. They always do. The public court of opinion. You ready to turn it into a chessboard? I asked. Always. Have the contract drafted and notarized, I said. I want it ready by Friday. He paused. Public signature? If she wants to perform, I said, looking out at the skyline that glittered like ambition, I'll give her a stage. Click. I ended the call. She thought she'd planned the next move. She thought a party would trap me in social niceties. But the board belonged to me now. And Friday night wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be a reckoning. Friday night arrived wrapped in expensive silk and bad intentions. Our house looked like a wedding planner's fever dream. Vanessa had gone all out. There was uplighting along the hedges, casting a soft, romantic violet glow against the cedar fence. White string lights draped overhead like a canopy of stars. A live jazz quartet, actual human beings in tuxedos, was tucked beneath a heated tent in the corner, playing something smooth and inoffensive. Waitstaff in black vests moved the crowd like shadows, passing silver trays of champagne and crab cakes to people who smelled of old money and newer divorces. Vanessa had orchestrated every single detail. She wore ivory, not white. That would be too on the nose, but close enough to spark a subconscious memory of a wedding day. The dress was silk, fluid, moving with her like liquid. Her hair was swept up, exposing her neck, vulnerable and elegant, and she was glowing. It wasn't a glow of happiness. It was that particular, radioactive kind of glow that comes from knowing you're about to steal the narrative back. She smiled at everyone like she'd just renewed her vows. She touched arms, laughed at jokes, leaned in to whisper secrets. She was working the room with the precision of a politician in a swing state. Meanwhile, I stood quietly near the edge of the patio, half hidden by a heat lamp. I wasn't drinking alcohol. I was nursing a club soda with a lime, watching it all unfold with a detachment that surprised even me. A month ago, this scene would have terrified me. I would have been sweating through my dress shirt, terrified of saying the wrong thing, terrified of ruining her perfect night. But tonight, I wasn't an actor in her play. I was the critic, and I knew the third act was going to be a disaster. People drifted by. Friends, colleagues, the neighbors who always looked at our house with a mix of envy and suspicion. Daniel, Greg, a different Greg, a guy from my firm, clapped me on the shoulder. He was already 2 martinis deep. Hell of a shindig. Vanessa really outdid herself. You guys celebrating something special? I looked at him over the rim of my glass. You could say that. Well, whatever it is, it's working, he grinned, gesturing to crowd. She looks happy, man. Good for you. Yeah, I said, my voice flat. Good for me? I checked my watch. 8:45 p.m. The signal came 5 minutes later. The music softened. The chatter died down as a distinct, sharp ting-ting-ting of a spoon against a crystal glass cut through the night air. Vanessa stood on the raised brick landing of the patio steps. It gave her just enough height to look down on everyone benevolently. The uplighting caught her profile perfectly. She waited for total silence. She was good at that, before she lowered the glass and smiled. A smile that could win elections. A smile that could hide a knife. If I could have your attention for just a moment, she said. Her voice was trained, projecting without shouting. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I know it's not often we throw these things anymore. Life gets so busy, doesn't it? But, well, sometimes life reminds you how precious togetherness is. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd. A few people nodded in agreement. Her eyes drifted over the heads of our guests and found mine in the shadows. She locked on. It wasn't a look of love. It was a tractor beam. She was pulling me onto the stage whether I wanted to be there or not. Daniel and I have faced some tension recently, she admitted, her voice dropping to a confessional whisper. I won't lie to you. Work stress, the merger, the usual disconnects that come with ambition and time. She paused just long enough for a hint of vulnerability to land. She was controlling the narrative by admitting a fraction of the truth to hide the whole lie. But love isn't about being perfect, she continued, her voice gaining strength. It's about staying. It's about choosing someone again and again, even when it's hard, even when you're tired. A soft hum of approval went through the group. A woman near the fire pit actually dabbed her eye with a cocktail napkin. Vanessa stepped off the raised brick ledge. She walked toward me slowly, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Her heels clicked with conviction on the pavers. She stopped 2 feet in front of me. She reached out and took my free hand. Her skin was warm. Her grip was iron. "I choose you, Daniel," she said quietly, but loud enough for the front row to hear. "Tonight, tomorrow, always." It was a brilliant move. It was checkmate. If I pulled away, I was a monster who rejected his wife's public declaration of love. If I accepted it, I was complicit in the lie, trapped in the social contract of us. She looked up at me, her eyes shining, waiting for the kiss, waiting for the fold. I didn't pull away. Instead, I gently placed my soda on the high-top table beside me. I turned to the small side table where I had stashed a slim, black leather folder earlier that evening, tucked beneath a stack of napkins. I picked it up. "I choose honesty," I said. I raised my voice just enough to carry to the back of the tent. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The silence in the yard was absolute. I opened the folder and held it up. The cream-colored paper inside caught the light. A marriage contract, I announced. Fair, clear, protective. Vanessa's smile froze. Her brow furrowed, a glitch in the software. "Daniel, what are you doing? You just spoke about choosing me," I said, looking her in the eye. "You spoke about love being real. Well, real love survives truth. So here's the truth." I held out a heavy, expensive fountain pen. "If you love me and you're sincere about always," I said softly, "you'll sign it." The words landed like a physical blow. The crowd stilled. No music, no movement, just a cool, electric buzz of disbelief. Guests glanced at each other, drinks frozen halfway to their mouths. Was this a bit? Was this a joke? Vanessa's smile faded like mist under a heat lamp. Her eyes darted from the contract to my face, then to the guests. "You're not serious," she whispered, her voice tight. "I am," I replied calmly. "No lawyers present to argue. No traps, just boundaries. It states that we are partners in love, not assets. It protects what I've built, and it protects what you've built. If this love you spoke of is real, if it's about me and not what I provide, then proving it with a signature shouldn't be hard." She let out a small, breathy laugh. It sounded frantic. "You want me to sign legal documents at a party?" she asked, looking around for support. "Daniel, this is absurd." "I want the performance to end," I said. She stared at me, face stone still. She realized she was trapped. If she signed, she admitted that the merger, the $10 million, was off the table. She'd keep me, but lose a lottery ticket. If she refused, she proved in front of everyone that the money mattered more than the man. She slowly turned toward the guests, her face twisting into a mask of victimhood. "You see," she said, her voice getting louder, shrill. "This is who he's become. Cold, calculating, obsessed with control." Whispers rippled through the group. "He's making a spectacle of our marriage," she went on, gesturing wildly at me. "Trying to trap me, humiliate me in front of our friends." "Who does that?" I stepped forward, laying the pen gently on the open folder. "I'm offering clarity," I said, "not control. You want to stand in front of our friends and declare your love. I'm just asking you to underwrite that declaration." Her face twisted, the mask slipping fast. The veins in her neck stood out. "This isn't love," she snapped, slapping the folder out of my hand. It hit the ground with flat thwack. The paper spilled out onto the patio pavers. The pen skittered away under a chair. "This is a trap," she yelled, abandoning the soft wife persona entirely. "You're manipulating everyone. You're trying to make me look like a gold digger because you're insecure." I shrugged. I didn't reach for the papers. I let them lie there, a testament to her choice. "I didn't make you look like anything, Vanessa," I said quietly. "You just did that yourself." She looked down at the contract, then at the pen, then at the faces of the people watching her, people who were now looking at her with wide, horrified eyes. She saw the reflection of her own outburst, and she lost it. "No!" she spat, stepping into my space, her finger in my face. "I'm not signing anything. This is your guilt, Daniel. Your paranoia. And now you want to turn me into some kind of monster because you're too broken to be loved without a contract." Gasps. Movement. A wine glass clinked onto a plate somewhere in the back. The insult hung in the air. Too broken to be loved. It was meant to shatter me. It was meant to make me cower. But all it did was confirm everything I had written in that journal. I held her gaze. I didn't blink. "Maybe I am broken," I said, my voice low and steady, audible only to her and the people in the front row. "But at least I'm not for sale." I turned slowly, deliberately. I walked past the stunned quartet. I walked past Greg, whose mouth was hanging open. I walked past the untouched champagne. "Daniel," she screamed behind me, "don't you walk away from me. We have guests." I didn't stop. I walked back into the house, through the open French doors. I didn't slam them. I didn't need to. Behind me, the party died with a silence. I heard the murmur start, a low roar of gossip and shock. I heard Vanessa's voice, high and frantic, trying to spin the story, try and pull the pieces of the evening back together. "He's having a breakdown. I'm so sorry, everyone. He's just under so much pressure." But nobody was listening to the script anymore. They had seen the improv. They had seen the raw footage. I walked through the empty kitchen, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and headed upstairs to the guest room. I locked the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. I listened to the sounds of cars starting in the driveway. I listened to the front door opening and closing as people made awkward, hasty exits. I listened to the sound of my marriage finally, publicly, hitting the floor, and for the first time in weeks, I slept. By Monday morning, the air in the house had changed. It wasn't just quiet, it was vacant. The atmosphere was thin, like the air at high altitude. There were no more stage breakfasts, no more accidental brushes of the hand in the hallway, no more vanilla candles trying to mask the scent of decay. Just a brutal, heavy silence and the occasional slam of a drawer. Vanessa hadn't spoken to me since the party. She had spent Sunday holed up in the master bedroom, emerging only once to pour a glass of wine she didn't drink. I saw her briefly in the hallway. Her face was pale, devoid of makeup. Her hair, usually curled and meticulous, hung limp around her shoulders. She looked like a ghost haunting her own life. But I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel triumph. I felt confirmation. This wasn't the woman I married, and maybe she never had been. Or maybe she was, and I had just been too blinded by the reflection of my own ambition to see her clearly. By Tuesday, the final documents were ready. Eli met me at the courthouse steps. The sky was a brilliant, indifferent blue. "Everything is in place," Eli said, handing me a thick envelope. "Division of assets, property rights, non-interference clauses. It's clean, fair, and unforgiving." I took the envelope. It felt lighter than I expected. "She could still contest," Eli warned, scanning the paperwork as we walked toward the security checkpoint. "She could drag this out, demand mediation, claim duress." I shook my head. "She won't." "You sure about that?" "She likes a fight." "She likes a fight she can win," I said. "And she likes a fight where she looks like the victim. After what happened Friday, after she screamed at me in front of half of South Lake Union, she doesn't want an audience again. She wants to disappear." Eli gave a nod. "Then let's get it done." When we entered the courtroom, Vanessa was already seated at the far table. She was with her attorney, some young guy in an overpriced suit who looked like he still called his mom for advice on tie knots. He was shuffling papers nervously. Vanessa sat perfectly still. She wore black, not a morning dress, but a sharp, severe business suit. Armor. She looked up when I walked in. Our eyes met briefly across the aisle. There was no anger in her gaze. No tears. Just fatigue. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion. She looked like someone who had been running a marathon in heels, and had finally just sat down on the curb. The judge called us forward. The tone was sterile, procedural. There was no need for testimony, no dramatic speeches. Everything had been pre-negotiated in the wake of the party disaster. Her lawyer had advised her to settle quickly before the incident became the talk of the town legal circles. The terms were solid, unshakable. She got half the house equity, which I would buy out. She got one car. She got a modest settlement from the pre-merger accounts. That was it. No future claim. No stake in the acquisition. No percentage of the $10 million that was set to hit my account in 9 days. It was over in under 20 minutes. The judge stamped the decree. The sound echoed in the high-ceilinged room. Thwack. Matter concluded. He droned. We stood up, outside the courtroom. The hallway was bustling with other broken lives. Lawyers arguing in corners. Couples crying on benches. I walked toward the exit, loosening my tie. I just wanted to feel the wind on my face. "Daniel." Her voice was small. I stopped. I turned slowly, keeping my hands in my pockets to stop them from shaking. Not from nerves, but from the adrenaline dump. Vanessa was standing 10 feet away. Her lawyer had already headed for the elevators, leaving her alone. "Please," she said, taking a hesitant step forward. Can we just talk once? Just you and me. No lawyers. No audience. I looked at her. About what? She swallowed hard, clutching her designer bag like a shield. I don't know. Not the legal stuff. Just us. I miss you, Daniel. It was a Hail Mary. The last-ditch effort to pull on a heartstring she thought was still attached. I looked at her. I didn't look at her with bitterness. I didn't look at her with anger. I looked at her with clarity. There is no us anymore, Vanessa. I said gently. You killed us the moment you thought I wouldn't notice you were gone. She shook her head, tears finally spilling over. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You thought I'd keep playing along. I finished for her. And maybe I would have, a year ago, maybe I would have bought the lie just to keep the peace. But I know who I am now. She stepped closer, her voice breaking. We were good once, weren't we? We were convenient once. I corrected. We were compatible. But that's not the same as good. The hallway felt colder than it was. She blinked quickly, trying to hold herself together, trying to find one last lever to pull. I still love you, she whispered. I gave a small, sad smile. No, Vanessa, I said, you love winning. And you just hate that for the first time in your life, you lost. She didn't follow me after that. She just stood there in that silent corridor of polished floors and echoing footsteps, watching me walk away. When I got back to my car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. I leaned my head back against the headrest. There was no music, no call to make, no one to report to, just peace. The kind that doesn't announce itself with trumpets. The kind that sneaks in quietly when you finally stop bargaining with people who only show up when the lights are on. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. I drove out of the parking garage and into the sunlight. I was alone. I was single. And in 9 days, I was going to be very, very rich. But honestly, the money felt like the second best thing that had happened to me that week. The best thing was the silence. 1 week later. Time is a funny thing. When you're suffering, it stretches out like hot tar, sticky, slow, impossible to pull yourself out of. But when you're waiting for the finish line, when you're waiting for the final signature on a document that defines the next chapter of your life, it moves at warp speed. The 7 days between the courthouse and the closing of the merger were a blur of adrenaline and paperwork. I spent most of that week sleeping in the guest room of my own house, or what used to be our house. Vanessa was in the process of moving out. We passed each other in the hallways like ghosts haunting the same castle. There were no more arguments, no more stage breakfasts, just the sound of packing tape ripping and the thud of cardboard boxes being stacked by the door. It was a strange purgatory. Legally, we were severed. Emotionally, the cord had been cut, but physically, we were still navigating the wreckage. I stayed late at the office every night, burying myself in the final due diligence for the acquisition. My team thought I was just being a perfectionist, ensuring the $10 million deal went through without a hitch. They didn't know I was staying late, because I didn't want to go home and watch my life being packed into a U-Haul. But finally, the day arrived. Friday, the closing date. I woke up at 5 a.m. The house was silent. Vanessa's car was gone from the driveway. She had stayed at her sister's the night before, presumably to avoid the awkwardness of the final day. I dressed in my best suit, navy blue, tailored. I tied my tie in the mirror, looking at the man staring back. He looked tired. There were new lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a month ago, but he also looked sharp. He looked ready. I drove downtown, the city of Seattle waking up around me. The fog was lifting off the sound, revealing the steel and glass giants where fortunes were made and lost before breakfast. The conference room on the 40th floor was freezing. It always is. They keep it cold on purpose. It keeps people awake, keeps them on edge. There were 12 people in the room. Lawyers from the acquiring firm, bankers, compliance officers, and Eli, who sat next to me like a bodyguard in a pinstripe suit. The table was covered in documents. Stacks of them. The closing Bible, they called it. For 3 hours we signed. Sign here. Initial here. Date here. My hand moved mechanically. My signature, which used to be a flourish of personality, had become a stamp of approval. I tried to focus on the terms. I tried to focus on the valuation. But my mind kept drifting to the empty house in the suburbs. I kept thinking about the marriage contract lying on the patio stones. I kept thinking about the look on Vanessa's face in the hallway of the courthouse. I still love you. No, you love winning. I pushed the thought away. Focus, Daniel. This is a win. This is what you sacrificed the weekends for. This is what you missed the anniversaries for. At 11:42 a.m., the lead counsel for the buyers closed his folder. He looked at his watch, then at me. That concludes the execution of documents, he said, his voice dry. The wire has been initiated. You should see confirmation within the hour. The room exhaled. Handshakes were exchanged. Polite, firm, professional. Congratulations, Daniel, Eli said, clapping me on the shoulder. You did it. You navigated the minefield and walked out with the gold. Yeah, I said, loosening my tie. I guess I did. I sat there while the room emptied out. I wanted to wait for the notification. I needed to see it. I needed the tangible proof that it was real. I stared at my phone on the polished mahogany table. 11:50 a.m., 11:55 a.m. And then it buzzed. A simple notification from my bank. Wire transfer received. $10 million. Status available. I stared at the number. $10 million. It's a number that people dream about. It's fuck you money. It's never work another day in your life money. It's the kind of money that is supposed to fix everything. I waited for the rush. I waited for the euphoria to hit me like a drug. I expected to want to jump on the table, to pop the champagne that was sitting in an ice bucket on the credenza. But the feeling never came. Instead, I felt quiet. It was a profound, sinking quiet. I realized, sitting in that high-rise office with the clouds drifting past the window, that the money didn't make me feel powerful. It didn't fix the hole in my chest. It didn't erase the memory of the lies or the vanilla perfume. It was just numbers, pixels on a screen. Don't get me wrong, it was security. It was freedom. It meant I never had to answer to anyone ever again. But it wasn't happiness. Vanessa had thought this money was the prize. She had held on to the marriage, performed the good wife act, purely to get a piece of this notification. She had debased herself, lied, and manipulated everyone she knew, all for a cut of this wire transfer. And sitting there, I realized the tragedy of it. She had chased the wrong thing. She had traded her integrity for a lottery ticket, and in the end, she lost both. I picked up my phone and cleared the notification. I stood up. My knees popped. I felt the weight of the suit jacket on my shoulders. I walked out of the conference room, past the reception desk where the assistants smiled at me, knowing I was now their most important client. I took the elevator down to the lobby. I stepped out onto 4th Avenue. The afternoon light was crisp. The air smelled of roasted coffee and exhaust fumes, the perfume of the city. I loosened my tie completely now, undoing the top button of my shirt. I rolled up my sleeves. I didn't go to my car. I didn't want to go back to the empty house yet. I didn't want to sit in silence. I just wanted to walk. I started moving south, toward the Pioneer Square district. I let the rhythm of the city wash over me. The tourists with their cameras, the buskers playing guitar on the corner, the office workers rushing to lunch. I was one of them, and yet I was completely separate. I carried a secret in my pocket worth 8 figures, but to everyone else, I was just another guy in a blue suit walking off a long week. I walked for blocks. I let my mind unspool. I thought about the last 10 years. I thought about the boy I was when I met Vanessa, eager, hungry, desperate to prove himself. I thought about how much I loved her back then. It was a loud love. It was passionate and messy and full of promises. And I thought about the man I was now. I wasn't eager anymore. I wasn't hungry in the same way. I was full, but it was a different kind of fullness. It was a fullness of someone who has eaten a bitter meal and realized it was exactly what he needed to survive. I turned a corner near a row of trendy cafes and bistros. The lunch crowd was thinning out, and that's when I saw her. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't my mind playing tricks on me, because I was thinking about her. It was Vanessa. She was sitting at a small, round table on the sidewalk patio of a French bakery. I stopped. I was across the street, shielded by a delivery truck that was unloading crates of produce. I stepped behind a lamppost, instinctively seeking cover. My heart gave a single hard thump, not of love, but of recognition. She was alone. That was the first thing I noticed. Vanessa hated eating alone. She used to say it made her look friendless. She always needed a prop, a friend, a husband, a phone call. But today, she had no props. She was sitting with her back straight, her posture perfect, ingrained from years of ballet and social climbing. But her shoulders were tight. They were pulled up toward her ears, holding tension like a coiled spring. She wasn't wearing the revenge dress or the good wife cardigan. She was wearing a simple trench coat, buttoned up to the chin, as if she was cold despite the sunlight. Her hair was pulled back in severe, messy knot. Not the style messy she usually did, but the I don't care anymore messy. There was a mug of coffee in front of her, but she wasn't drinking it. She was staring at the street. Her eyes, usually so active, always scanning the room for the most important person to talk to, always checking reflections, always performing, were still. They were unfocused. They were fixed on a spot of pavement in the middle of the intersection. She looked hollow. I stood there, hidden by the city, and just watched her. I watched the woman who had shared my bed for 7 years. I watched the woman who had cooked me pancakes to cover up an affair. I watched the woman who had screamed at me in a courtroom hallway. And for the first time, I saw her without the filter of my own emotions. I didn't see a monster. I didn't see a villain. I saw a person who had spent her entire life building a facade, brick by brick, lie by lie, only to have the foundation crumble because she forgot to put any cement in the mix. She looked small. She looked like someone waiting for a bus that had already come and gone. A waiter came by and refilled her water glass. She didn't even look up to thank him. She just kept staring at the nothingness. I wondered what she was thinking about. Was she thinking about the money she lost? Was she thinking about Evan? Was she thinking about me? Or was she thinking about the silence waiting for her back at her sister's guest room? I could have crossed the street. The thought crossed my mind. I could have walked up to her table. I could have stood there in my tailored suit with my $10 million secret and looked down at her. I could have offered a platitude. Hope you're doing well. Or I could have twisted the knife. Looks like you missed the payout. The old Daniel, the one who was hurt, the one who journaled his anger at 2 a.m., might have done that. He might have wanted the satisfaction of seeing her face when she realized I was doing better than her. But as I watched her lift a trembling hand to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, I realized something profound. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to win anymore. I had already won, and the prize wasn't the money. The prize wasn't seeing her miserable. The prize was that I didn't care. The indifference washed over me like a cool wave. It was absolute. It was clean. She was just a stranger at a cafe. A stranger who carried a pocket full of my memories, sure, but a stranger nonetheless. She was a character from a book I had finished reading. Why would I open the book again just to reread a sad chapter? I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. I looked at her one last time. I silently wished her peace, even though I knew she probably wouldn't find it. You can't find peace when you're at war with yourself. Then I turned my collar up against the breeze. I turned away from the cafe. I turned away from Vanessa. I kept walking. I headed toward the pier where the water met the sky. I didn't look back. I didn't check to see if she had spotted me. I just walked. And with every step, the silence inside me grew a little louder, a little richer, and a little more like home. The pier was windy. It's always windy down by the water in Seattle, a constant, salty draft that comes off the Puget Sound and cuts right through whatever you're wearing. I stood near the railing, watching the ferries churn up the dark water, leaving white scars of foam in their wake. I checked my phone again. The banking app was still open in the background. $10 million. I turned the screen off and shoved it deep into my pocket. It's a strange thing, standing on the edge of the world with a secret that could buy half the city block behind you, and realizing that you don't want to buy anything. I didn't want a yacht. I didn't want a flashy sports car to park in front of a club. I didn't want to text my friends and say, "Drinks on me." I just wanted to breathe. I stood there for an hour, maybe 2. I watched the tourists take selfies with the Great Wheel. I watched the fishermen wrestle with a line that had snagged on a piling. I watched the sun begin its slow, bruised descent behind the Olympic Mountains. And as the sky turned purple, I realized that the war was officially over. The treaty was signed. The borders were drawn. Now came the hard part. Peace. Most people think peace is the absence of conflict. It's not. Peace is the aftermath of conflict. It's looking at the rubble of your life and realizing you have to pick up the bricks, one by one, and decide which ones are worth keeping and which ones need to be hauled away to the dump. I walked back to my car as the street lights flickered on. The drive back to the suburbs felt different this time. For years, driving this stretch of I-5 meant dread. It meant mentally preparing for the second shift, the job of being Vanessa's husband. It meant rehearsing conversations, anticipating moods, wondering if I'd be walking into a cold shoulder or a stage performance. Tonight, the highway was just a road. The destination was just a house. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. Not the romantic candlelit dinner dark. The nobody lives here anymore dark. Vanessa was fully gone. She had come by with movers 2 days ago while I was at the office. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The echo was immediate. If you've never stood in a house that used to be a home and is now just real estate, it's a haunting experience. The furniture was still there. I had bought her out of her share, and she didn't want the bad energy of the old sofas. But the life was gone. The throw blankets were folded too perfectly. The counters were too clean. The air smelled stale, like trap dust and old arguments. I walked through the rooms, doing a final inventory. The dining room, where she had staged that disastrous brunch with my parents. The table looked small now, just a slab of wood. The ghost of that conversation. He's just getting into moods. Still hung in the corners, but they were fading. The living room, where she tried to seduce me with takeout and vanilla candles. The fireplace was cold. The mantel was bare. She had taken the photos. Good. I didn't want to look at the lie anymore. I walked up the stairs. The master bedroom. This was the hardest room. This was where the silence had been the loudest. I looked at the bed. I looked at the empty side where she used to sleep, curled away from me like a fortress. I opened the closet. It was half empty. My suits hung on the left, disciplined and orderly. The right side, her side, was a cavern of empty hangers. Wire and velvet skeletons clinking together in the draft from the door. She had left something, though. Sitting on the shelf, right at eye level, was a small box. I reached out and took it down. It was a jewelry box. I opened it. Inside was her wedding ring, and the diamond engagement ring I had spent 6 months saving for back when I was 26 and thought love was enough to conquer the world. There was no note, no dramatic letter, just the rings, cold and heavy in my palm. I stared at them. I remembered the day I bought the diamond. I was terrified. I was sweating. I remembered the day I put on her finger. She had cried. Were those tears real, or was she just playing the role of the blushing bride even then? I realized it didn't matter. I snapped the box shut. I didn't feel a pang of longing. I felt a sense of completion. The transaction was closed. Returns accepted. I put the box in my pocket. I would sell them. Or maybe I'd throw them into the sound. Or maybe I'd just keep them in a drawer as a reminder that the most expensive things in life aren't the ones with price tags. They're the ones that cost you your self-respect. I slept on the couch that night. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bed. The next morning, I called a realtor. Sell it, I said. Don't you want to wait for the market to? List it today. I interrupted. I don't care about the price. I want it gone. I want the furniture sold. I want the keys out of my hand by the end of the month. Okay, she said, sensing the tone. Consider it done. I packed my remaining things into 2 suitcases and a couple of boxes. That was it. 10 years of life, compressed into the trunk of a sedan. I drove away from that house at noon on a Saturday. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. You can't drive forward if you're staring at what you left behind. The next 6 months were a study in reconstruction. I rented a temporary apartment in the city, a high-rise in Belltown with floor-to-ceiling windows and exposed concrete pillars. It was the opposite of the suburban colonial I had just left. It was stark. It was modern. It was cold. And I loved it. I needed the cold. I needed the clean lines. I needed a space that didn't have memories hiding under floorboards. I threw myself into work, but not in the frantic, desperate way I had before. The merger was done. The integration was messy, as these things always are, but I navigated it with a new kind of authority. When you have $10 million in the bank, you walk differently. You speak differently in meetings. You don't tolerate incompetence because you don't have to. I wasn't working because I needed the paycheck anymore. I was working because I liked the game. And when you play the game for fun, you tend to win more often. But socially, I was a ghost. My phone stayed quiet. The group chats had officially died. I ran into people occasionally. Seattle is a big city, but the circles of the successful and vaguely unhappy are small. I saw Greg again, the one from the party who had been drinking martinis. I was picking up takeout from a sushi place on 2nd Avenue. He was waiting for a table. "Daniel," he called out, waving me over. He looked a little older, a little more tired. "Man, I haven't seen you since the party." "Yeah," I said, holding my paper bag of food. "It's been a while." "We miss you, man," he said, lowering his voice. "The group isn't the same. It's gotten weird." "Weird how?" I asked, though I already knew. "Vanessa and Evan," he grimaced. "They're still trying to make it happen, but it's painful to watch. They fight a lot, publicly, and honestly, nobody really likes Evan. We tolerated him because he was your friend. Now he's just a guy who blew up the group. I nodded. Sound exhausting. It is, Greg sighed. Listen, a bunch of us are going to a cabin next weekend. Chelan, just the guys. No drama. You should come. It would be like old times. I looked at Greg. I looked at his hopeful, slightly desperate expression. He wanted to come back so things could feel normal again. He wanted me to absolve the group of their awkwardness. I appreciate the invite, Greg, I said. So you'll come? No, I said. His smile faltered. Oh, come on, man. You can't hold a grudge forever. It's not a grudge, I said gently. It's just that I don't live there anymore. Live where? Chelan. In the past, I said. I don't fit in that box anymore, Greg. Those old times you're talking about, they were built on a foundation that didn't exist. I'm building something new now. Greg looked confused. He didn't understand. He was still trying to patch up a sinking ship while I was standing on dry land. Give my best to the guys, I said. I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool night air. I didn't feel lonely. I felt light. It was a lightness of shedding a skin that had grown too tight. I spent a lot of time alone that year. I started running. At first, it was just to burn off the restless energy, but then it became a ritual. I ran along the waterfront. I ran through the sculpture park. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs shook. There is a clarity in physical exhaustion that you can't get from a therapist's couch. When you're on mile 6, you can't lie to yourself. You're just trying to breathe. I started journaling again, too. But this time, it wasn't a log of evidence. It wasn't Vanessa came home late. It was real. October 14th. The silence in the apartment was loud today. I almost called her. Not because I miss her, but because I miss having someone to tell about my day. I have to relearn how to validate my own existence. November 3rd. Saw a couple fighting in the grocery store today. The guy looked terrified. I wanted to walk up to him and tell him, leave now. It doesn't get better. But I just bought my apples and left. December 25th. First Christmas alone. Mom and Dad want to come up, but I told them I needed to do this. I cooked a steak. I drank a bottle of good wine. I watched Die Hard. It was quiet. It was weird, but it was mine. And slowly, painfully, the me that had been buried under years of wheat started to dig its way out. I bought a guitar. I hadn't played since college. My fingers were soft, clumsy. I sounded terrible, but I played every night. I started reading books that weren't about business strategy. I read fiction. I read history. I let my brain wander into places that had nothing to do with ROI or profit margins. I was dating myself. I was getting to know the man Daniel Bennett had become when no one was watching. And then, about 8 months after the divorce, I met someone, or rather, I re-met someone. I was at a charity gala. I had to go. It was one of those obligations that comes with the executive title. I was standing near the bar, nursing a scotch, scanning the room for an exit strategy. You look like you're plotting a jailbreak. I turned. Standing there was Elena. I knew her from the periphery of my old life. She was a landscape architect. We had hired her firm years ago to do the backyard of the old house, but Vanessa had fired her because she didn't share the vision. Translation. Elena had told Vanessa that hydrangeas wouldn't survive in the shade, and Vanessa didn't like being told no. Elena was holding a glass of white wine. She wore a simple black dress, sharp and elegant. Her hair was cut short, framing a face that was intelligent and amused. I admitted. Is it that obvious? You're checking your watch every 30 seconds, she smiled, and you're standing as close to the door as you can get without actually leaving. I laughed. Guilty. I heard about the divorce, she said. She didn't say I'm sorry. She just stated it as a fact. News travels fast. I said, Seattle is a village, she shrugged. How are you holding up? I'm good, I said. And for the first time, when I answered that question, I wasn't lying. I'm really good. You look different, she observed, tilting her head. Lighter. I lost about 120 pounds of dead weight, I said. She laughed, a rich, genuine sound that cut through the polite murmur of the gala. Vanessa was a lot. That's the diplomatic way of putting it. I'm not known for my diplomacy, Elena said. I like your backyard, by the way. It had potential. Shame about the management. We talked for an hour. We didn't talk about my money. We didn't talk about the merger. We talked about soil acidity. We talked about the brutalist architecture of the library. We talked about why coffee tastes better out of a ceramic mug than a paper cup. It was easy. It was unforced. When the gala started winding down, she handed me her card. "I'm not trying to sell you a retaining wall," she said. "But if you ever want to get coffee and not talk about corporate synergies, let me know." I took the card. "I'd like that." I watched her walk away. I didn't feel the thunderbolt. I didn't feel the earth move. I felt curiosity. And after a year of feeling nothing but dread and relief, curiosity felt like a superpower. I went home to my quiet apartment. I stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. I took the card out of my pocket and set it on the counter next to my keys. I wasn't ready to jump into anything. I knew that. The scars were still pink. They hadn't turned to silver yet. But I picked up my phone. I didn't text her. Not yet. Instead, I opened my calendar. Saturday, hike. 8 a.m. I smiled. I was busy Saturday. I had a date with Mountain. And for now, that was enough. But I left the card on the counter, just in case. I waited 3 days to call Elena. In my old life, the life where I was constantly auditioning for my own wife's affection, I would have called immediately. I would have texted 10 minutes after the gala. I would have overanalyzed emoji usage. I would have tried to lock it down before she lost interest. But the new Daniel, the one who had spent the last year rebuilding his nervous system from scratch, he didn't feel the need to rush. I called her on a Tuesday evening. I didn't text. I dialed the number. "Hello." Her voice was slightly breathless, like she had just walked up a flight of stairs. "Elena, it's Daniel," I said, "from the gala." "I remember," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "The man plotting the jailbreak. Did you make out alive?" "Barely," I said. "I had to listen to 3 more speeches about synergy before I could escape." She laughed. "Tragic. I hope you're calling to redeem that coffee offer, because I'm currently looking at a design draft that makes me want to scream, and I need an excuse to procrastinate." "I am," I said, "but let's skip the coffee. How do you feel about Thai food and arguing about urban planning?" "I feel very strongly about both." We met at a small, hole-in-the-wall place in Fremont. It wasn't fancy. The tablecloths were plastic, and the lighting was fluorescent. It was the kind of place Vanessa wouldn't have been caught dead in, because the lighting was unflattering for Instagram. Elena showed up wearing jeans and a sweater. She ordered the spiciest curry on the menu, without hesitating. We sat there for 3 hours. And here's the thing about that date. Nothing happened. No fireworks. No grand declarations. No tension where I was wondering if I was saying the right thing. It was just easy. We talked about her work. She spoke passionately about native plants and soil drainage, and I found myself actually listening, not just waiting for my turn to speak, but genuinely interested in what lit her up. I told her about the merger, but I didn't frame it as a conquest. I framed it as a relief. "So you're retired?" she asked, spearing a piece of tofu. "Semantically, yes," I said. "Functionally, I'm consulting. I like building things. I just don't like owning them anymore." She looked at me, her eyes sharp and intelligent. That sounded like a metaphor. "It probably is," I admitted. At the end of the night, walked her to her car. It was raining, Seattle drizzle, soft and persistent. "This was good, Daniel," she said, turning to face me. "It was," I said. I didn't try to kiss her. It felt too soon, and frankly, I was enjoying the tension. It was a healthy tension. It was a feeling of reading the first chapter of a book and knowing it's going to be a good one. "Call me again," she asked. "I will." I drove home feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with whiskey or adrenaline. It was the warmth of being seen, not as a provider, not as a status symbol, but just as a guy who likes Thai food and bad jokes. It felt like oxygen. But the past has a nasty habit of knocking on the door just when you think you've changed the locks. 2 weeks later, I was in my home office, the spare bedroom of the apartment I had finally bought. It was a Saturday. The rain was hammering against the glass. My phone rang. It was Eli. I frowned. The merger was done. The divorce was finalized. The assets were split. There shouldn't be any reason for my lawyer to be calling me on a weekend. "Eli," I said, picking up, "to what do I owe the pleasure? Please tell me I didn't forget to sign a tax form." "I wish it was taxes," Eli said. His voice was grim. "We have a situation." My stomach tightened. "What kind of situation?" "Vanessa," he said. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the gray sky. "What about her? Is she contesting the furniture sale?" "She can have the rug, Eli." "I don't care." "It's not the rug, Daniel," Eli said. She filed a motion this morning. A motion for what? To reopen the settlement. Silence filled the line. I felt a cold prickle of heat run up the back of my neck. On what grounds? I asked, my voice dropped an octave. She signed the agreement. She signed the contract at the party. It's ironclad. She's claiming duress, Eli said. Her lawyer, she got a new one, by the way, a shark from downtown, is arguing that the public nature of the signing at the party constituted emotional coercion. She's claiming you staged the event to humiliate her into signing away her rights to the community property. I let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. She planned the party. She invited the guests. We know that, Eli said calmly, and we have the emails to prove it. But that's not the point. The point is, she's coming after the merger money. She found out the valuation, Daniel. She knows you cleared $10 million a week after the divorce was finalized. So she's greedy, I said. That's not a legal strategy. No, but she's desperate, Eli corrected. And desperate people throw lawsuits at the wall to see what sticks. She's hoping you'll settle just to make it go away. She's betting on your desire for privacy. She thinks you'll write her a check for $500,000 just to keep her out of your life. I closed my eyes. I could see her. I could see Vanessa sitting in some lawyer's office, spinning a tale of victimization. He trapped me. He forced me. I didn't know what I was signing. It was pathetic, but it was also infuriating. She wants to fight, I said quietly. She wants to pay out, Eli said. Do you want me to file a motion to dismiss? It might take a few weeks, legal fees, a deposition or two. Or we can offer a small nuisance settlement. No, Daniel, it might be cheaper to... No, I repeated. Not a dime, Eli. Not one single dime. She had her chance. She made her choice. Okay, Eli said, shifting gears instantly. Then we fight. But I need you to know something else. What? Evan left her. I paused. When? Last week. Apparently. The romance didn't survive the reality of a studio apartment and a budget. He moved back to Chicago. She's alone, Daniel. And she's broke. That's why she's doing this. I hung up the phone. I sat there in the silence of my apartment. I thought I would feel vindicated hearing that Evan had bailed. I predicted it. Everyone predicted it. Narcissists don't stick around when the supply runs dry. But I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. She was like a zombie in a horror movie. Just when you think the credits are rolling, the hand shoots up out of the grave. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city. She wanted to play the duress card? She wanted to claim I coerce her? Fine. If she wanted to reopen the book, I was going to make sure she read the ending properly this time. I didn't wait for the lawyers. I knew, logically, that I should let Eli handle it. That's what I paid him for. But this wasn't about the law anymore. This was about the narrative. Vanessa was trying to rewrite history again, and I was done letting her hold the pen. I sent her a text. Meet me, the coffee shop on 4th. 1 hour. It was risky. Eli would have had a heart attack if he knew. But I knew Vanessa. If she thought there was a chance for a settlement, a chance for a check, she would show up. I walked to the coffee shop. It was the same one where I had seen her through the window months ago. I arrived early. I ordered a black coffee. I sat in a booth near the back, facing the door. She walked in 10 minutes late. A power move, or maybe she just couldn't get her act together. She looked different. The last time I saw her close up was at the courthouse. She had looked tired then. Now, she looked brittle. She was wearing a coat that I recognized, an expensive trench from our old life, but it looked slightly worn. Her hair was done, but the dyed job was fading at the roots. She spotted me and hesitated. She smoothed her coat, lifted her chin, and walked over. She was trying to summon the old Vanessa, the queen bee, the woman who commanded rooms. But the aura was gone. It was like watching a magician whose tricks had all been exposed. She slid into the booth opposite me. She didn't order anything. You wanted to see me, she said. Her voice was cool, but her hands were trembling slightly on the table. I heard from Eli. I said, You're suing me. She shrugged, a jerky motion. I'm just asking for what's fair, Daniel. You tricked me. I stared at her. Tricked you? You knew, she hissed, leaning in. You knew that merger was closing. You knew exactly how much money was coming. And you staged that circus at the party to shame me into signing a waiver. It was manipulation. It was insurance, I said. And you signed it because you want to prove to everyone that you weren't a gold digger. You signed it to save face. Vanessa, Not because I forced you. I was under duress, she said, her voice rising. A few people at nearby tables glanced over. You were under the influence of your own ego, I corrected calmly. She glared at me. I helped you build that career, Daniel. I hosted the dinners. I charmed the clients. I sacrificed my own ambitions to support yours. And then you cash out for $10 million and leave me with a used Honda and a rented condo? It's not right. You had half the house, I reminded her. You had the settlement. You had enough to start over. It's gone, she whispered. I paused. What? It's gone, she looked down at the table. Evan, we traveled. We stayed in hotels. I thought I could launch my own consulting firm. It didn't work. The money is gone, Daniel. I looked at her. I realized then that she wasn't suing me because she thought she was right. She was suing me because she was drowning. And Evan, I asked. She flinched. He couldn't handle the pressure. He left. So you're broke, you're alone, and now you're coming back to the well, I said. I was your wife for 7 years, she cried, tears welling up. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Can't you just help me? You have so much. You wouldn't even miss it. She reached across the table, trying to take my hand. I pulled my hand back. I won't miss the money, I said. You're right. I could write you a check for $100 grand right now and not even notice. Her eyes lit up. Hope. It was a hungry, desperate thing. But I'm not going to, I said. The light died in her eyes. Why? She whispered. Because you hate me? No, I said. Because if I give you money, I'm validating your narrative. I'm admitting that I owe you something. And I don't owe you anything, Vanessa. We are square. You traded the marriage for a fling with my best friend. That was the deal you made. You don't get to renegotiate the price just because you spend the payout. She stared at me, her mouth open. She looked like a child who had been told Santa Claus wasn't coming. You're cruel, she said. I'm consistent, I replied. I stood up. I placed a $20 bill on the table. Buy yourself a coffee, I said, and call your lawyer. Tell him to drop the motion, because if you pursue this, I will countersue for legal fees. I will drain whatever you have left, and I have 10 million reasons why I can play this game longer than you can. She shrank back against the booth leather. She looked small, defeated. Daniel, she choked out as I turned to leave. What am I supposed to do? I stopped. I looked back at her one last time. I don't know, I said honestly, but figuring that out is the first honest thing you'll have done in years. I walked out of the coffee shop. I expected to feel heavy. I expected to feel sad for her. But as I stepped onto the sidewalk, I realized I didn't feel any of that. The cord was cut. The final thread, the guilt, the obligation, the lingering sense of responsibility for her happiness, had snapped. I took out my phone. I had a text from Elena. Elena, I found a trail near Snoqualmie. It looks like it has a waterfall. Saturday? I smiled. The knot in my chest loosened. Me, I'm in. I put the phone away and walked toward the train station. The sun was breaking through the clouds, hitting the wet pavement and turning the gray city into silver. I was free, not just legally, not just financially. I was free of the past. And for the first time, I wasn't just walking away from something. I was walking toward something. Eli called me 2 days later. I was in my kitchen making toast. It's a small detail, but in my old life, I never made toast. I never had time. I was always rushing out the door with a protein bar and a stomach full of acid. Now I have time for toast. I have time to butter it while it's still hot. She withdrew the motion, Eli said. He sounded satisfied, like a mechanic who had just tightened the last bolt on an engine rebuild. Her lawyer sent over the notice this morning. With prejudice, which means she can't refile. It's done, Daniel. Legally, she is in the rearview mirror. Good, I said. Send me the bill. Already done. And Daniel, yeah. You handled that meeting better than I would have advised, Eli admitted. Sometimes the law is a blunt instrument. Sometimes you just need to look someone in the eye. I hung up the phone. I stood there in the quiet of my apartment. I waited for the surge of triumph. I waited to feel like I should do a victory lap. But the feeling was softer than that. It was a feeling of taking off a heavy backpack after a 10-mile hike. You don't jump for joy. You just stand up straighter. The Vanessa chapter was closed. The book was back on the shelf. That Saturday, I went to Snoqualmie with Elena. It was raining because, of course, it was. The trail was a muddy slog of tree roots and slick rocks. The air smelled of wet pine needles and ozone. Elena was faster than me. She scrambled up the rocky inclines with an agility that put my treadmill cardio to shame. She didn't complain about the mud. She didn't complain about her hair getting frizzy. She stopped every 20 minutes to point out a fern or a moss formation, telling me the Latin names. We reached the waterfall around noon. It was roaring, swollen with the week's rain. The spray hit our faces, cold and shocking. We sat on a dry rock to eat our sandwiches. Ham and cheese on baguette, wrapped in wax paper. "So," Elena said, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek, "did the ghost go back to the grave?" I nodded. She dropped the lawsuit. "I figured she would," Elena said, taking a bite of her sandwich. "Bullies usually fold when you don't flinch." I looked at her. Is that what she was? A bully? Toward the end? Yeah, Elena said. She was trying to bully you into taking responsibility for her choices. That's what people do when they can't handle their own shame. They try to outsource it. I looked at the waterfall. The noise was deafening, drowning out the rest of the world. I almost gave it to her. I admitted, not the money, but the sympathy. When I saw her in that coffee shop, she looked so broken. Part of me wanted to fix it. That's who I was for 10 years. The fixer. And Elena asked, and I realized that if I fixed this for her, I'd be robbing her the lesson, I said. And I'd be disrespecting myself. Elena smiled. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Her hand was cold from the rain, but her grip was solid. "I like the new Daniel," she said. "He has a backbone." "I'm growing fond of him, too," I said. We hiked back down in comfortable silence. And that was the difference. With Vanessa, silence was a weapon. It was a vacuum that needed to be filled with apologies or reassurance. With Elena, silence was just silence. It was space. It was room to breathe. 6 months later, life had settled into a rhythm that I can only describe as luxuriously boring. I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't buy a penthouse. I kept my modest apartment in the city, but I bought a small piece of land on Whidbey Island. Just dirt and trees, and a view of the water. I started spending my weekends there. I bought a set of tools. I started building a cabin. Not hiring a crew, building it. Me, a stack of lumber, and a lot of YouTube tutorials. There's something profoundly healing about hammering a nail. It's binary. You either hit it or you don't. The wood doesn't lie to you. The wood doesn't gaslight you. If the frame is crooked, it's because you made it crooked and you can fix it. I was sanding a beam one Saturday afternoon when my phone buzzed. It was Greg. I hadn't spoken to him in months, not since I turned down the guy's trip to Chelan. "Greg, hey man, weird question. Do you still have the contact for that vintage car mechanic you used to use? The one in Georgetown?" I wiped the sawdust off my hands and typed back the number. "Me, ask for Sal. Tell him I sent you. Greg, thanks. Hope you're good. By the way, saw Vanessa yesterday." I paused. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't ask. I didn't need to know. But Greg was Greg. He couldn't help himself. Greg. She's working at that high-end boutique in Bellevue Square. Managing the floor. "Look, okay, tired." We made eye contact but didn't speak. "Just thought you'd want to know." I stared at the text. Vanessa, managing a floor at a retail store. Folding clothes. Dealing with entitled customers who demanded to see the manager. It was a far cry from the life she had planned. It was a far cry from the consulting firm she wanted to launch with my money. I tried to find an emotion. Did I feel gloating? Did I feel sad? I felt nothing, just a vague sense of acknowledgement, like hearing the weather report for a city you used to live in. "Oh, it's raining in London? That's too bad. But you don't put on a raincoat." I typed back, "Thanks, Greg. Hope the car runs well." I put the phone down. I picked up the sandpaper. I went back to work on the beam. The wood was smooth under my fingers, warm and real. A year went by. The cabin was finished. It wasn't perfect. The porch listed slightly to the left, and the finish on the floors was a little uneven, but it was mine. Elena and I spent Christmas there. We didn't do a big party. We didn't invite the who's who of Seattle. We invited my parents. They drove up from Oregon. My mother was nervous at first. She loved Vanessa. She had mourned the divorce almost as much as I had. She had struggled to understand why I couldn't just make it work. But when she saw me at the cabin, something changed. She saw me laughing with Elena while we tried to rescue a burning turkey. She saw me sitting by the fire, reading a book, looking 5 years younger than I did when I was married. On the last night of the visit, my dad and I were sitting on the porch, drinking whiskey. The air was freezing, but the whiskey warmed our chests. You know, my dad said, looking out at the dark water, I was mad at you for a while. I thought you were being stubborn. I thought you were throwing away a commitment. I know, Dad, I said, but watching you now. He shook his head. I didn't realize how heavy that load was until I saw you put it down. You were drowning, son, and we were all standing on the dock telling you to swim harder. It's okay, I said. You didn't see the water rising. She was good at hiding the leak. He clinked his glass against mine. Well, you made it to shore. That's what matters. Yeah, I said. I made it. One afternoon in late spring, I was back in the city for a meeting. I was walking down First Avenue, heading toward the market to pick up flowers for Elena. It was our 1-year anniversary. I stopped at a crosswalk, and there she was. She was in a car, stopped at the red light, a silver Honda Civic, older model. Vanessa was driving. She was alone. The window was rolled down. She was staring straight ahead, waiting for the light to change. She looked normal. She wasn't the glamorous, high-maintenance wife anymore. She wasn't the desperate, broken woman in the coffee shop, either. She was just a woman in traffic. She had cut her hair to her shoulders. She wore sunglasses. She was singing along to the radio. I could see her lips moving. For a second, the light caught her profile, and I remembered everything. The first date, the wedding, the text message, the screaming in the hallway. It all flashed by like a movie trailer for film I had already seen. I could have waved. She might have seen me, but I didn't. The light turned green. She pressed the gas. The car moved forward, merging into flow of traffic, disappearing into the sea of metal and glass. She was gone. I stood there on the corner, holding a bouquet of tulips wrapped in brown paper. I realized then that the opposite of love isn't hate. It isn't anger. It isn't even indifference, really. The opposite of love is becoming a stranger. She was just a person I used to know, a lesson I had to learn. I turned and kept walking. I grew up thinking that success sounded like applause. I thought it sounded like a room full of people laughing at your jokes, or the ding of a wire transfer hitting your bank account. I thought it looked like a perfect Instagram photo, or a wife who looked at you like you were a god. I chased that noise for a decade. I let it deafen me. But I was wrong. Success is quiet. Success is waking up on a Saturday morning without an alarm clock and not feeling a knot of dread in your stomach. Success is a text message that says, I'm running late, start the movie without me, and trusting, fully, completely trusting that she's actually running late and not running around. Success is sitting on a porch you built with your own hands, watching the sun dip below the horizon, and realizing that you don't need to post a picture of it to prove it happened. I have $10 million in the bank, but that's not my wealth. My wealth is the fact that when I walk to my front door tonight, I won't have to perform. I won't have to guess which version of my partner is waiting for me. I'll just walk in. I'll kiss Elena. I'll put the flowers in a vase. And then we'll sit in the silence, and it will be the most beautiful sound in the world.